This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, Carl Tatz Design, and Isotope. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now through Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD. So get ready to rock.
So I asked Vance when I was just starting out, and I asked him, hey, Vance, what is your end-all, be-all desert island guitar amp? If you could only have one amp to rule them all, what would that guitar amp be? And he, without blinking, he said 1964 Fender Vibroverb. And that's the first ever Fender amp that had reverb and vibrato, so hence Vibroverb.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. If you are rocking a Mac Mini M1 in your studio, then you should definitely check out the new OWC Mini Stack STX Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expansion solution. It's the perfect size to seamlessly stack with the Mac Mini and add storage and connectivity over Thunderbolt or USB. Whether you have the new or old Mac Mini, nothing stacks up in your studio quite like OWC. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Do you need to record direct stereo keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the Stereo BBDI-2 with custom wound high-Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad. The Spectra 1964 BBDI passive direct box is also perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 complementer, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. Get your sound moving at Spectra1964.com. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lij Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Mike Fahey, an engineer, mixer, and producer hailing from the great state of Maine originally. Mike went to college for mechanical engineering at the University of Maine before switching over to an audio engineering degree at the New England School of Communications, or NESCOM. His first instrument was the trumpet in elementary school band, and later he picked up the guitar at age 11. But finally, in 2012, he landed an internship after learning how to record at Sputnik Sound after Vance Powell came to speak at NESCOM earlier that year about mixing for the Raconteurs Consolers of the Lonely album. Mike moved to Nashville that fall, and after 2 months of interning was hired by Mitch Dane to be his assistant engineer at Sputnik Sound. During that time, Sputnik moved to a new building in Berry Hill, where Mike helped with construction for 7 months, renovating the studio, and in late 2014, Vance Powell hired Mike as his assistant engineer, where he has been ever since. In May of 2020, Mike started his own studio, Starboard Sound, and has been able to spend time on his production projects while also working full-time at Sputnik as Vance's assistant, and I guess maybe doing other tasks as well at Sputnik. So thank you so much to Vance Powell and Mitch Dane for making our introduction. Please welcome Mike Fahey to Recording Studio Rockstars. Mike, are you ready to rock, my friend?
I'm ready, Lij. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks. I guess we crossed paths quite a few times probably over at Sputnik, just parties and stop-by visits and things like that. Maybe even when I interviewed Vance there originally?
Yes, I believe so. Definitely some parties, and then Mark Rubel's the engineering luncheons. I'm sure
That's right.
I've seen you at a couple of those as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to those coming back in full spirit, full swing.
Yeah, me too.
Well, it's great to have you here on the show, man. Thanks for coming to join us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background. I love hearing that you're from Maine. I, of course, am a lover of Maine. I go to Acadia National Park every summer of my life, pretty much.
Oh, wow.
And Tell us, like, where in Maine are you from? Like Portland area or somewhere else?
Yeah, just south of Portland. So I grew up in a little beach town, Wells, Maine. It's near Kennebunkport. A lot of people know that area.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, so pretty sleepy little town, I'd say, but it gets inundated with tourists in the summertime. So we go from really quiet and peaceful, pretty harsh winters up there as well, and then it just goes full swing crazy with tourists from Massachusetts, New York, Montreal. Everybody kind of just flocks to that little coastal region of Maine for the summer.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, that's the thing about places like Maine or, the northern states is when the summer weather comes, everybody just goes crazy. And, it's like 3 months of intense, making the most of that time. And one of the things I really appreciate about places like that is I'm guessing you guys probably had a lot of music festivals and music going on outdoors during the summer.
Yeah, exactly. There's a bunch of cool venues in Portland. Portland City Music Hall, and I grew up definitely looking forward to the outdoor music festivals, and yeah, music was always a big part of my life. It's kind of funny that nobody in my family actually plays any instruments, but I'd say everybody is a really big music appreciator. So music was always kind of a big part of my childhood growing up, and I got some pretty cool eclectic tastes from my dad on his side. Some Lou Reed, some Tom Waits,
Nice.
Velvet Underground, and then Rolling Stones, of course. And then my mom was more. She loved Steve Miller Band. I think her first concert was Bad Company. So yeah, just a lot of kind of your straight down the middle classic rock stuff was kind of the soundtrack of my childhood.
Yeah. So I grew up in Massachusetts, New England as well.
Awesome.
And, I feel like I got a really strong foundation on classic rock from growing up in that part of the country.
Yep. My dad's family's all from Malden, Massachusetts, that area.
Sweet. All right, man. All right.
Yep.
Well, very cool. So now you got into playing some music and you got into guitar. How serious were you into guitar? Were you playing in bands and doing that kind of thing?
I was, yeah. So trumpet was my first instrument, the elementary school band, typical sort of pick an instrument. I really enjoyed it. And then I got to probably around 6th grade or so, and it was the point at which your parents either had to pay for the instrument in full, and it was like a last, big payment to actually have the instrument be yours rather than, I think, you rent it for a couple of years. And my mom asked me if it was something that I was going to continue with versus playing some school sports or something like that. Like if I had more time to dedicate to sports rather than the trumpet. And as a kid, it was like, oh, I can run around outside and play outside and not have to be in here studying and music and trumpet. I was like, yeah, I'll do that. So
right. And by sports in Maine, of course, you're referring to lobster wrestling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, pulling up lobster traps and buoys. Yeah. Yeah, so I actually decided to give it up. And looking back on that, I really wish I hadn't. I wish I had stuck with it and continued. But luckily, I picked up the guitar because I had an older sister, and she's kind of ambidextrous. So some things she was good at left-handed, some things good at right-handed. And my dad had bought her a guitar to try out. And the guy at the music shop said, you should try and learn a right-handed guitar because that's the majority of the time, that's what you're going to see. You're not going to really see a lot of left-handed guitars out there if you wanted to just, pick up a guitar and have a jam session or something.
One in particular.
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly. So she actually, I think she should have had a left-handed guitar in order to excel at it. And she just had this brain block. So she tried for a little while and then she just put it on the shelf. And I remember it was down on a shelf in our basement. And it was probably down there for a couple of years, just kind of brand new and untouched. And funny enough, it was an Epiphone Stratocaster.
Sweet. Probably sounded killer.
From the 90s, which people think Epiphone and Gibson, they don't make Strats. So it was kind of this odd year in the 90s when they decided to make some Stratocasters. So yeah, that was the guitar, and I picked it up, and it had a book in it for sheet music. So funny enough, and kind of counter to how many guitar players learn how to play guitar, I actually picked it up and went through this book and was pretty familiar with music theory and reading music because of trumpet. And so I was able to translate that with this book. And so I was learning how to play, Ode to Joy and When the Saints Go Marching In and
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
like that at the start, just to kind of get my bearings. But that allowed me to kind of pick it up faster than most, I think. And then, you get down into learning tablature. And once I figured that out, then it's like, oh, you can look up how to play any song. And that was a lot more, a lot easier to kind of figure out riffs. And then I also got good at playing by ear and just listening to stuff and kind of figuring it out that way. But yeah, from the ages probably 11 to 13, I actually lived with my grandparents for a short period of time. My parents divorced and my mom was moving. And so to stay where we were in school, because she was moving out of state, she was moving to New Hampshire. I decided to live with my grandparents for a couple of years so I could stay at the school I was going to that I'd always been going to. And I lived in their basement in this room, and I literally kind of just hunkered down for a couple of years in that basement. And that was kind of my only outlet, was playing guitar. So
yeah, it's funny how like when life throws challenges at you, like family changes and moving and different living situations, that can be a really golden opportunity to get really into playing music.
yeah, definitely. So going into high school, I was pretty good and met up with a couple other guys, and we started a band. And there was probably a couple different variations of it over the years. People left and some new members came, but yeah, that was always my biggest hobby growing up, and biggest passion, biggest hobby. So
right on. What were you into? Sort of classic rock style music as you were playing in your band?
Oh yeah, the bands we were just covering AC/DC, Zeppelin, Hendrix, yeah, all that kind of
sweet,
straight down the middle stuff. Yeah.
So that gave you an appreciation for the sound of a rock band recorded. Like guitar tones,
Exactly.
drums, bass, stuff like that, which
Yep.
you've obviously gone on to do a lot of. What was some of your, like how'd you transition into the recording bit and then make it down to Nashville? It's kind of a cool story that you got to meet Vance up there. Next thing you know, you find yourself down in Nashville.
Yeah. So I think that the story of how I got there is kind of interesting. In the bio you mentioned, so I went to the University of Maine right out of high school for mechanical engineering. And I picked that because I knew I had a brain for engineering. And I actually was in MET, which is mechanical engineering technology. And that degree specialized in the machine shop side of
Right
mechanical
on.
engineering. So I actually was building engine parts. We were using milling machines, grinding wheels, lathes. And I remember one of the courses that I took, the project was you broke off into groups of a couple kids and you kind of delegated which parts each person on the team would make. And then the team would create over the course of the class, make an engine that ran off of compressed air with a flywheel. And then the contest at the end of the class was to see whose engine put out the most RPMs under the same pressure, the same PSI. So that really interested me. Like I was super into that. And I really liked the concept of having a finished product. So something to show for the work that you were doing. So like something, something tangible. And so I liked that whole idea of creating something and having it to have as a finished product. So
I'm beginning to see the connection to Vance Powell already, because I know that he's got a soft spot for, any deep kind of engineering and building stuff from some of his background stories.
Yes, exactly. I think his father was a master machinist, and then each of his grandfathers were engineers in their own rights as well.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
Yep. So we did have that in common. And another thing Vance and I had in common too, is before that, I was actually looking into aeronautical engineering. And I was actually kind of shopping around, looking at schools. Embry-Riddle is a really good one. And I was actually really into for a while, thinking about designing aircraft and airplanes. And I know Vance is actually a huge aircraft buff. Like, he can name any model plane that you've never heard of, basically. Yeah.
Nice.
So we nerd out on that every now and then.
Right. So how'd you end up down in Nashville?
Yeah. So the whole thing with mechanical engineering is I was good at it, but once I got into some higher level courses like thermodynamics and some calculus or some crazy math that goes along with all that, I kind of looked around at my peers, and a lot of the people in the program, and being from up north in Maine, it's a lot of fun, but all they were talking about amongst themselves is like souping up their snowmobiles and
right.
Stuff like that. And like I said, it can be fun, but I was like, maybe this isn't something I want to do for the rest of my life. And I kind of picked it because I knew it was good. You could get a good job out of school and make decent money. But yeah, I just kind of started to have second thoughts. And then that kind of got me a little disillusioned with the courses. I started slacking a bit. I kind of started skipping class. Did my fair share of partying and kind of lost my way a little bit. But
we know you were building bongs and pipes and metal shop class.
Bongineering, yes,
Bongineering.
exactly. Yes. So halfway through my sophomore year, I decided to leave school, leave the University of Maine, and I went home to kind of regroup and figure it out. I went part-time to University of Southern Maine in Portland, and I just commuted up there, and I took a couple gen ed classes just to knock them out. I took 2 horrible classes, which was public speaking and chemistry. So that was an interesting time of year. And while I was regrouping, my sister, so she's responsible for the guitar in my life, she actually kind of came up with the idea. It never really dawned on me that audio engineering was a thing. Like I never thought about like who's actually making those records or how they're being made, or that you can be a guy or girl in the studio, and that can be, you can make a living that way.
Yeah. Or you can at least try.
Yeah, exactly. Give it a shot and then become a real estate agent. She kind of planted that seed, and I looked around, and there was a school. I remember the first school I saw was in Rhode Island. I think it was in Warwick, Rhode Island. And I was looking into their program, and then a little more research, and I saw the audio engineering program at New England School of Communications, and that was in the town. It was in the city of Bangor, which was just a little ways down the highway from Orono. So I applied there, and then that next semester, I was able to stay up in Orono with the people I was my roommates from the previous year, and I just commuted over to Bangor. And the school it's very cool. It's a satellite school of Husson University, and they are primarily audio, video, broadcast journalism, kind of focused in those things. And I got a 4-year bachelor's degree in communications, and it's with a concentration in audio engineering.
Right on.
Yep. And so,
and Bangor is a really cool town. I mean, I went through the summer, and I was really struck by how just unique and original and sort of creative it seemed under the surface. A little bit dark at the same time, maybe. But it just seemed to have some good, like, there was some interesting kind of, goth stores and stuff like that there.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. There's a bunch of random stuff up there, but they got the Bangor waterfront. That's a pretty big venue, open in the summer times. And, so I went there, and the way my connection to Vance and Sputnik is, like you said in the bio and the intro, he came up to our school. Dave McLaughlin was my advisor, and he was also the head of the audio department. And he met Vance through Audio Engineering Society, AES. And so he talked Vance into coming up there right around the time that Raconteurs Consolers, the Lonely record had come out, and Vance brought some tracks with him and laid it out on the desk and did a demo for the class. And obviously that left a huge impact on me, listening to that and seeing how he shaped those sounds, and kind of just got it in my head like, man, I'd really love to work for that guy. Figure out how he's doing that.
Before your band hits the studio, it's smart to have all the songs and notes in one place. But setting up a shared cloud folder can be frustrating. There's always somebody in the band who can't seem to log in or wants to use a different platform. Not so with Samply. It's easy to add collaborators to a project so the whole band can upload new songs and make comments before the session. Just upload your voice memo or mix and start collaborating. Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at samplyaudio.com, or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months. With so many game-changing iZotope plugins to choose from, deciding which one to buy next could be a bit of a challenge. But did you know that now you can have all their plugins through iZotope's affordable subscription bundle, Music Production Suite Pro, for only $19.99 per month? Get your Rockstar extended 30-day free trial subscription now at iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. You know, there's a funny aside about Consolers of the Lonely. So that is going back a little ways. And if you look on the album cover for that, I think it's, I'm looking at it right now. I think it might be on the back half. There's a picture of the people that are in it. It's the girl who's got, I think she's got a bird on her. That's my stepdaughter.
Oh, no way.
Yeah,
No way.
That's my daughter's older sister. She was part of the video shoot. I mean, the photo shoot for that album. Yeah. Great record too. Really awesome record.
Fantastic. Yeah. So when it came time to do my internship, since that relationship between Dave, my advisor, and Vance had been established, Dave set me up with being the first intern from my school for Sputnik. And I was doing really well in the program. I kind of finally hit my stride as a student there because I was motivated. I was interested. At first, it was interesting because I wanted to learn how to record, and I was hungry to get the knowledge because I wanted to apply it to myself. I would go home and try some of these techniques, and I had a little Zoom 4-track demo maker.
Oh, nice.
And a little Digitech, pretty good sized Digitech pedal board that just kind of did, everything that Digitech ever made.
And this is when you're already interning with Vance down at
This
Sputnik?
is when I was still in college, up at Maine. So I hadn't gone down to see Vance
But
yet.
eventually we're getting to Nashville, right?
Yes, we're almost there. Yes. But so that, I think, so Dave kind of says in school that left an impact on me was that you got to pick one side of the glass or the other. Like, pick which side of the glass do you want to be on, because it's trying to kind of weed out students that maybe they were interested in being a singer or guitar player or something like that. And to really excel and take advantage of the program, you kind of have to put that to the side, at least for now, and focus on the engineering side, like what they're really teaching you. So,
which kind of sucks a little bit, to be honest.
It does. It does. I feel like there's very few people that can do both really well. There definitely are. And great producers are oftentimes great musicians as well. Yeah. So they can play on records, or they can speak the language and communicate with the artist musically. So I definitely use that to my advantage now. But I don't really advertise that I play guitar in Nashville because everybody plays guitar, and
it's too late now, man. You're on record. You're on recording Studio Rockstars. Well, everybody knows.
Oh no. Yeah. Well, I wasn't as good as I once thought I was after moving down to Nashville. Put it that way.
Yeah. I've heard that a lot. People was like, I don't call myself a guitar player in Nashville. And I'm like, come on, everybody.
Yeah. They're everywhere. So once I got set up with that and I excelled, I was kind of the top of my class. So I think that's why Dave made me the guinea pig for NESCOM to be the first intern at Sputnik. So it was kind of a big deal. And so did a little interview with Vance's assistant at the time, and a little Skype interview, in fact. And we set up a time and did a little meet and greet. I flew down here and
sorry, I got to interject another joke. That was probably the last time you used Skype, right? And then,
yes,
and then that was for this interview.
Exactly. Yep. Had to look up
Old
my old
school.
login name.
I'm dating myself.
All good.
All right, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're good. And so, yeah, I picked a time. I moved down here in September of 2012, kind of what would be the fall semester, and I had maybe 9 credit. I had a decent amount of credits that I needed to graduate, so there was a lot of credit hours for me to complete. So I got down here and found an apartment complex kind of over Tusculum area, Whispering Hills, and would just started my internship, kind of just thrown into the mix of things, and really got lucky, kind of right place, right time. I was an intern for about 2 months, and I was the only intern. Now, normally, because it's Mitch Dane and Vance Powell under the Sputnik umbrella, we'll have an intern that's kind of Mitch's and an intern that's kind of Vance's. And so I just happened to be the only one there. And the natural progression of things at Sputnik is that if Vance needs an assistant, if suddenly his goes freelance, he will steal Mitch's assistant because they're not super green and they kind of know the lay of the land. They know the studio. They know where things are. So
it's because Mitch is too nice to beat Vance up for that.
Yeah, exactly. He won't stand up to him. No. So it's unfortunate for Mitch that he will get one stolen, but
it's all right, Mitch. We're giving a shout out right now on the podcast for new assistants for Mitch. Just a steady flow of new assistants.
Yeah, exactly.
We got your back, Mitch.
Yep. So he took Mitch's assistant, and then I was the only intern. So Mitch offered me the job, and I'd only been an intern for about 2 months. I hadn't completed all of those credit hours I needed to graduate. So technically I was hired before I even graduated school, which that's kind of best case scenario for anybody, I would say.
Yeah, that's an amazing progression to be able to go from intern to hire so quickly. I kind of experienced that too when I interned at Woodland Studios at the end of my internship. They did hire me to keep doing what I was interning to do, but it was tech work. And ultimately they wanted me to come in at midnight and stay till 8 in the morning fixing things. And I was like, this is not exactly what I want to do.
Yeah.
So I had to choose to move on. Well, so that's cool that you got to work with Mitch because he's awesome. His studio always looks amazing. It's got so much, personality in the space, the way the colors and the design and everything. What was some of the stuff that you remember learning from Mitch when you were assisting him there and working with him?
I'd say the biggest learning curve that I had to get over was we didn't use analog tape at all in college. So, you're learning basic theories about recording, getting a good foundation from school. But as far as the medium, it was always Pro Tools. And so going into Sputnik at the time, I think there was like 9 tape machines in the building, and I had never used one. And at the time, pretty much every record that Mitch and Vance were making were on tape.
Right on. So that's pretty cool. So you had to learn tape from scratch in the studio?
From scratch in the studio. Yeah. Crash course in
give
tape.
Us, speaking of crash, give us your nightmare story of tape. You must have one somewhere, right?
Oh, I mean, I've heard of them along the way, but I think the worst that probably happened to us was we had one situation. I was working for Mitch, but it was on Vance's side. Where the tape machine just crapped out in the middle of the session. So call Studer Steve to come fix it. But
Studer Steve.
But I never really had many. Luckily, I never really had any really big mess ups.
Nice. You didn't
erase tracks.
Yeah, you didn't erase the session the night between.
Right. Yeah, I think we've all heard a couple of those horror stories over the years. But knock on wood, never had that happen.
So
to me.
those were Studer machines like the 824 or something, which had the computerized
827.
alignment. I mean, that's what I
Yeah.
mean, 827, yeah.
Yep. So Mitch had the 827. Vance had the A800. I believe it was a Mark III. So the Vances, you had to kind of get down and use a screwdriver to align it. Mitch's, the 827, the Cadillac of Studer machines, that was the onboard alignment system.
And the punch, and you could punch really easily. And I think if I recall correctly, you could play in reverse and record in reverse. Isn't that true?
I believe so. Yeah. There was a couple little like shift functions or something to accomplish that. But yes, I believe you could.
I have something to say about that. That is badass. That's me eating in the mic, trying to be impressive. All right, cool. So, so what do you remember thinking about analog tape? I mean, did you like the way it sounded? Do you still use it today, or do you miss it if you don't?
Well, so at first, definitely was kind of fell in love with it. Like, wow, the fidelity, and then it forces you to make decisions. So just kind of, it was interesting. I definitely liked it at first. Was kind of all in because that's what Mitch and Vance were doing, and these are the guys I was learning from. So I was like, oh well, this must be the way. So it's kind of funny as the years progressed. Vance got his first Burl mothership and replaced, I think, just whatever the 192s he was using to record for his interface. And as I mentioned before, the tape machine went down in the middle of a session, and the artist asked. So they just had to keep going. They had to proceed. So they were doing the record. Half the record was on tape, and then the tape machine died. Couldn't get it fixed and had to keep going. So he just went straight Burls. And the input transformers on the Burls saturate very similar to tape.
That's why. Is that part of why people like them so much?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And you can actually clip every single kick and snare, any sort of high SPL, mostly drum hits is what you're doing it to. But anything coming in really hot, you can hit the Burls like tape and make them saturate. And in Pro Tools, the clip light will show up as you're recording, but when you play it back, it doesn't clip.
Wow, that's just like tape.
Yeah, exactly. So Vance loved that and still uses the Burls to this day. So obviously, it's working for him.
Let's break that down just for a moment for the rock stars. So what that means is that when we would record to tape or to the Burl, for example, the transient peak would exceed, the 0 point of our converters going into Pro Tools, right?
Correct.
And so it would look like we were doing a bad job of recording until we rewound the tape after we had recorded it. Because in other words, we'd be recording to tape through input going to the Pro Tools. But then when we rewind the tape and play it back, the tape has like shaved off all those peaks. So now it just looks like a fat signal that's no longer getting overs going into Pro Tools.
Right. You're not getting that digital clipping, but it's saturating and smoothing off those transients. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then just to clarify also, the mothership is basically, it's like a rack unit that you can load up with converter cards and you can have 24 or more inputs. Is that how it works?
Yeah, you can have if you wanted to go all inputs, like I believe the Stapleton rig that Vance built, I think it has like 64 inputs. So you can have input cards or output cards.
Okay.
And I think at first they had like bad 4s, that's the analog to digital, and then BDA 4s, the digital to analog. And now I think they have bad 8s and BDA 8s. So I think you can do, I'm not sure how many, I think maybe you can do 8 slots of 8 is how you would achieve that.
Yeah, I'm looking at one right now on Reverb, and it looks like it's the bad 8. Looks like it has 8 inputs, I guess, right? And then the Bada 8 is 8 outputs.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So thanks, man. Appreciate that.
Yeah, you can mix and match any of those. But so Vance asked the artist that when the tape machine went down, at some point they were doing overdubs, and the artist stopped Vance and asked him and said, "Hey, did we cut this song? Is this a song that we cut to tape, or is this one that we just did with the Burls?" And Vance kind of perked up and looked back at him and said, "You tell me. What do you think?" And the artist couldn't tell the difference. between a song that we had cut to tape and a song that we had just cut straight with the burls.
Wow.
And so I think that was a light bulb went off there, and thought, maybe tape, maybe we don't need tape. And there are a lot of great things about tape, and we do occasionally do a record to tape. We probably do at least one a year. Depends on the artist. We like to do it with a really well-rehearsed band, oftentimes when we're doing everything live, just to capture everything in the moment. And Vance really likes to do 2-inch 8-track. So that makes you really force your decisions, because oftentimes drums are only 1 or 2 tracks, and you're just bussing everything in, and that's the sound of the drums when you get down to it. You can't really do a lot to a stereo track of drums other than a little EQ, a little compression. But once you get that balance, that's it.
The first time I heard a Carl Tatz Phantom Focus mix room featuring the PFM HD1000 master reference monitors, I was blown away. It was like listening to 3D holographic audio where I could reach out and touch the instruments with rock solid bass down to 20 hertz. It was awesome. And now I've got one of my very own at the Toy Box Studio in East Nashville. What's amazing is that the Phantom Focus system can be implemented in your existing control room too, or even your bedroom studio, giving you world-class sound. Go see how cool your studio could look and sound at phantomfocus.com. This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can go to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level. And you can start right now with my free introduction to mixing course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins and Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. How does it feel when you record a take and then you rewind the 2-inch 8-track and hit play? What's that like?
Oh, it's massive. And yeah, the feeling of rewinding and playing back, it's nothing else beats that. So yeah, nice. So I think that was a light bulb that went off, and we kind of started to go away from tape. There's a couple other reasons. The tape that they make nowadays isn't as good fidelity-wise as the tape that they used to make. In fact, a lot of tape that Vance uses is kind of new old stock stuff rather than the new stuff. I think it's actually down to what chemicals companies are now allowed to use to actually create the tape.
Oh, wow.
A lot of those chemicals are really caustic, and I think they were banned by the EPA. So you can't physically make tape like you used to, and so it sheds a lot easier. The high end, the frequency can be just not as rock solid as it used to be. Like after you align it and you kind of sweep the tones and watch the meter go, and it'll just go wacky rather than being rock solid like it used to be.
It's wild to think that tape that's good for us is not good for us, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's benzene. There's some sort of chemical that back in the heyday of 60s and 70s of bands making analog tape, like the Hudson River had like a horrible amount of this benzene chemical in it, just from trash. And yeah,
thank God for burls.
Yep. So that's
and new old stock.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So, and then I know Mitch I think he has a cool Neve console, doesn't he?
Yes, it's a 8014, and I believe there's only 3 of those in Nashville. It's a 16 channel. So it's got 16 1073s or slots. I think he's got a couple of different models there, not just all 1073s. And then it's got a monitor section, a little jukebox, 16.
Right on.
For the monitor side. Yeah. And then Jack White has one, same model. And then I believe there's one at Trace Horse Studios, but those are the only 3 in Nashville.
Oh, cool, man. All right. Yeah. So you did, what other stories would you like to share from working with Mitch?
Well, I think the big story was not long after he hired me. We were located, the old Sputnik was located at the House of Blues. Mitch had rented, I believe, for 10 years, maybe more, from Gary Bell's at the House of Blues. which now is owned by Universal Music Group, and I believe it's back to being called East Iris Studios.
In Berry Hill.
In Berry Hill, yep. So we were renting from them, and at some point something happened, and we had to go. So Mitch started looking around for studios, and that process lasted a couple of months, and we finally landed on a building that was still on the same street, East Iris Drive. I believe the old address of Sputnik was 516, and now we're 408. So it's just same side of the street, just a little ways down, closer to the police station and Calypso Cafe there. So
gotta love Berry Hill, Tennessee for that.
Oh yeah, yep. So it was a 900 square foot building initially that he bought, and we obviously had to add on to that. And it was just a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom home, because Berry Hill is an interesting area where there was a lot of, it was all residential to begin with. At some point it went mixed use, and there's still a couple houses that are residential that have just been grandfathered in. And so I think if they were sold now, they would have to be commercialized or mixed use. But so this house was a little, an old woman had passed away, and then somebody had bought it and was going to turn it into a restaurant, and then they couldn't because of parking, something to do with the laws in Berry Hill. So they just turned around and sold it to Mitch, and we quadrupled the footprint. So it was 900 square feet, and it's just over, it's probably 3,800 square feet, something like that. So we more than quadrupled what was there. So that was about a 7-month build out. And that started, I believe, December 2013. And then we did our first session in June of 2014. So my dad's a carpenter, and Mitch knew this because actually at one point my dad was in Nashville visiting me for the holidays, and Mitch needed a vocal booth built at the old Sputnik. And my dad and I actually built a bunch of really nice 703 baffles, and they accordioned off the wall. They were on casters. And so you could fold the booth, like make a fake booth out of these two accordion baffles. And then we made it so they hooked, when you rolled them out, they made a box, and they connected with magnets. And so that was pretty cool for his little overdub room. And so they knew I was just dangerous enough with some power tools that they put me to work. So I was doing, at first I was doing a bunch of demolition, because we basically gutted the place down to the studs. And then adding on, I just kind of did a bunch of grunt work while they did the foundation and framing and all that, roofing. But then once we got the initial frame up, the contractor that we worked with, Tony Payne, he took me under his wing and taught me a bunch. And that was one of the most valuable things that I've gotten along the way at Sputnik, was actually building what is a world-class professional audio, a recording studio. So
and a great studio too. It's a beautiful place.
Yep. And so I was able to do a lot, figure out a lot about soundproofing. And I wouldn't trade that experience for anything.
Tell us a little bit about things you remember learning as you guys were moving from one studio and building a new one. What were some of the things where you're like, we've got to do this way. Here's a design element that really is going to make this studio situation work. And let's remember, rock stars, that we're talking about 2 studios in one building. So it's like 2 different producers sharing a space. There are some parts of that are going to be shared, and then there's some parts of that are really going to want to be isolated from each other, right?
Yep, exactly. And so I think the big thing was the main tracking rooms for each side. They were as far away as possible. One corner in the back is Vance's, and then the opposite corner in the front is Mitch's. So to kind of have that separation inside the building was key for the overall blueprints of the place. And then you kind of walk in. The front area is kind of a shared lounge studio space. Oftentimes where kind of all the bands come and kind of take a break and eat lunch. And then Vance has kind of go through a hallway, and everything after that room was actually built on. So that whole hallway, Vance's B room, There's a tech shop. There's a lounge and a little kitchenette for Vance's side, and then multiple booths, tracking room, control room. All of that was built from the ground up. And so yeah, Vance basically designed that, and his time over at Blackbird Studios and designing that massive studio, definitely he took a lot of what he learned and applied that to this place. I remember one of the key things that he wanted done was a straight shot outside, because we have a back door, like a load-in door to the tracking room. So if bands can pull up alongside the building and just load in through a side door.
Oh, nice.
But that side door goes straight through another set of doors. There's a little booth in between the control room and the tracking room. And then that door into the tracking room, it's a straight shot in so that he can wheel a console straight in and doesn't have to go around any corners.
Right.
So that was like one of the main things I remember, that we had to build a direct shot in and out of the control room to outside. Yep.
That's one of those things I just had to learn. Consoles coming in and out of studios, you don't always remember to think about that. It's a big ass piece of furniture that, despite the fact that you think that you're putting it in once and you're never going to move it, you're going to move it one day.
Yep. And we had to move. We've had multiple. So he had a Neotech lawn in there at first, and then he bought a Soundcraft, this massive 3200 Soundcraft that was Hans Zimmer's, and it was 88 channels of flying faders. Wow. And it was like 9 feet long. So it barely fit in the room. And then we had that for about a year or two. And then he got what he currently is using, the SSL 6000. It's a film desk. So yeah, we've moved quite a few consoles just over the six years or so that we've been open there. Wow.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you about that stuff too.
Yeah.
One last thought about the design before we move on is the hallway. I noticed that I think you guys cleverly made sure that the hallway was part of the design so that it became the sound buffer between one studio and another studio, or the tracking room and the lounge area and Mitch's studio.
Yeah, it's actually kind of like almost like you're saying, like a little airlock or something. But the hallway was definitely designed to knock down the sound between our tracking area, our first booth, and then Mitch's control room would be the closest thing to that. So
yeah, and then I guess also between Mitch's control room, between Vance's control room and the live room where the band might just be rocking out, there's also like a machine room between, right? Which acts as a bit of another sound buffer, doesn't it?
There's two booths that are in between. Yeah. So you have to go through a booth to get into the large tracking room. So that was by design as well.
Yeah.
The machine room is actually off the lounge. We've snaked all the cables up through the wall into that little closet in the lounge.
So much to think about, rock stars. So much to think about.
Oh yeah.
Look, I love using iZotope plugins for my music and podcast productions. In fact, you're hearing Ozone and RX on my voice in this podcast episode. And now you can get access to all the iZotope plugins through the subscription bundle. For only $19.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, Tonal Balance Control, Visual Mixer, and more, including free plugin updates. And just for you rock stars, get an extended 30-day free trial subscription at iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscription. So you just finished an awesome mix and sent it off to the band, but the singer texts you with lyric changes, the drummer emails you wanting a different fill, and the bass player DMs you about a wrong note in the chorus. But which mix version were they talking about anyway? Don't you wish there was an easier way? Samply comes to the rescue as your ultimate mix assistant, streaming high-quality mixes so that your clients can easily listen and send notes from their mobile phone on the road or the computer back at the studio. All mix comments are time-stamped directly onto the correct mix version with no confusion, and everything is easy to find in one location. No more missed mix messages from the band. Phew! Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at samplyaudio.com and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off for the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Mike Fahey, joining us from Starboard Sound, talking about assisting Vance Powell and Mitch Dane down at Sputnik Sound here in Berry Hill. So, Mike, you ready to jam, dude?
I'm ready for the session.
All right, man. So we got lots of ground to cover here, so maybe we'll move quickly. But, working with Vance and assisting him, and I believe you're still doing that today. So you've been with him for a long time there. So you must know and have learned a ton about mixing and about the process of doing that and or producing, recording the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So just start where you want, but just tell us about, what your role is with Vance now and what that looks like. What kind of stuff do you do with him?
Yeah. So it'll be, this December will be 7 years that I've worked for Vance, and my main role as his assistant depends on what we're doing in the studio. If we're mixing, so we receive the files from the band we're mixing, and I will take those, and we have a B room that has the same exact Burl rig set up as his as far as the I/O. And so I can take those tracks and set them up in the box like I would be setting them up down on his SSL console. So whatever I do to that session, I can take it, set it up, and when I open it up downstairs in the A room, it'll be exactly laid out how it should be on the console. So nice. He has channels that are always going to be the same thing, kind of room mics 1 and 2, kick snare 3 and 4, toms 5 and 6, overhead 7 and 8, and just kind of down the line. So I know the routing that I need to do. If there's any tuning, vocal tuning, I'll go through and melodyne, and that's kind of like at my discretion at this point. And then if there's any sort of errors that I see, I'll clean anything up. I usually clean up tops and tails. If they're not already, I've set up a lot of tracks over the years, and I've kind of seen it all. Yeah. A lot of people don't really respect the crossfade. So right. my big thing is just going in and make sure there's no pops and clicks that are going to come back to bite us down the line.
As Blue Oyster Cult once said, "Don't fear the fade, rock stars."
Exactly. So yeah, once I've got all the songs prepped and set up, I'll go down to the A room, pull them up there, lay them out on the console, set up the console tape with all the instruments, the band's name, the title of the song, and the date. And then I will get a balance and kind of make sure that everything with his mix patch is correct. The mix patch kind of doesn't tend to change song to song, but it might sort of change album to album. So depending on what we're mixing, he might want me to swap out some effects on various auxes. Mm-hmm. Usually the buses are all kind of parallel compressors, stuff like that, coming back in parallel. So those don't change a lot. And then I'll just kind of get a good overall balance, make sure things are in phase. I kind of go through and flip phase if stuff's out of phase. Nice. And then I actually have a big checklist on like a mobile note on my phone, and so I go through and check sample rate is right. Make sure the sample rate's correct. Make sure the SMPTE is working so that we can use the VCA automation with the SSL. Make sure that that's clocking back and forth correctly, and just all the little preferences that Vance likes. The window, the way that the window preferences are, and so I kind of have a little checklist that I run through, and then I just pass it off to him.
Yeah, that's so great to hear, because it's also a reminder of how challenging it is when you find yourself trying to work with an assistant for the first time, and you imagine, like, how in the world do you get from the very first try of having help to, having somebody who's incredibly talented at assisting as you are now, Mike, with this perfect checklist of all this stuff.
Yeah.
That must have been an evolution for you guys.
It was. I mean, there's a huge learning curve to figure out what somebody's preferences are, and it's really just a daily sort of song by song or project by project, like, hey, you've been doing things this way, I really kind of prefer it this way. And so you just kind of pick up on these things and just learn. The ultimate point, and Vance has talked about it at length, is as an assistant to be able to anticipate what the engineer or producer you're working with, what they're wanting before they want it.
Yeah.
And actually we kind of are at that point, especially tracking. Sometimes Vance will stop and be like, hey, you know what we need? And I will say exactly what he's thinking, or already be one step ahead of him and out in the tracking room and setting up a microphone, or, kind of doing things that over the years I know that have applied in this situation. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, man, it's all getting so easy now. I have to admit, I miss getting angry at you.
Exactly. And I actually wouldn't mind touching upon, this made me think of the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours theory. And if you're familiar with that, because I think it definitely applies in my case. I've been at Sputnik it's coming up on, it'll be 10 years in September of next year. So very long time.
You might be looking at almost 20,000 hours by now.
Yeah. If you break it down. So actually, the 10,000 hours, if you've ever done the math on that, it's pretty interesting. So 10,000 hours, you divide that by 24 hours in a day. That's about 416 days, which is just under a year and 2 months. But that is every waking hour. That's like if you did this straight, and that's obviously not possible. Right. So if you broke it out to more realistic framework, you could say like a Monday through Friday work week, 8 hours a day for 52 weeks. That's about 2,080 hours. So just to make it simple, that's about 5 years that you would have to do that schedule full time before you can say that you've hit that 10,000 hours mark. And basically the whole theory for listeners who haven't heard about it is that if you apply that much time, that mixed with talent, mixed with preparation, that after you plan and work on something for 10,000 hours, that you could be as good as any professional at whatever activity you're performing.
Right. It's like 10,000 hours to mastery, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think initially that was all brought about in respect with chess masters. So they said that like no chess master had really studied chess for less than 10,000 hours. Yeah.
Nice. Well,
so it's interesting.
It's cool to hear you do the breakdown over 5 years again, because in my head, I just carry around 5 years having done this before. And I feel like you've just double checked our math. So
yeah, exactly.
There it is, Rockstars. 5 years.
Yep.
Was that 5 days a week or 7 days a week? I forgot.
That's 5 days a week, 8 hours a day.
Reasonable. So, totally reasonable.
Right. And that's obviously not your Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. That's not the music industry at all.
Not at all.
But so yeah, plus or minus, we work some weekends we've worked through, and a lot of 12-hour days. So
I'm going to have to do the math on this. I'll find out when exactly we hit 10,000 hours of recording studio rock stars.
Exactly. There you go.
Hopefully I'll figure out how to do a podcast interview by then. Well, very cool, man. So, why don't we jump to the real, I can't even think of a funny joke. So I'm just going to say, let's go to the dirt, man. Tell us a story of a really important failure for you in the studio.
Oh man.
Something that turned into a great learning experience.
Yeah. Well, there's kind of little failures all the time. Like in learning, you're going to make mistakes. In recording, you're going to make mistakes, and just being able to kind of not sweat the small stuff and learn from those mistakes and carry on. But definitely one that has stuck in my mind is Vance and I were recording a band who shall remain nameless. And it was a single. So we wanted to see how that went. The single went in hopes to do more. And I believe Vance's management had worked out a deal, but it was on short notice that the band was in town. So we just kind of fit them in the schedule. And I think it was 2 days recording one song and mixing it. So we set up, and there was definitely some weirdness with the band. We were kind of unsure how they were feeling about the experience, but we got a really great track. So I think the band was dealing with a lot of pressures at the time, maybe touring a lot and just trying to squeeze in this session. But so I'd made pretty good friends with their tour manager. He was kind of like a jack of all trades, like their day-to-day guy. But he helped me with the setup of all their gear and kind of getting ahead of the game and figuring out a plan for the session. And he was a really nice guy. So we worked together pretty closely prior to the session and then afterwards too. So the band, at the end of the mix, I was either printing mixes or documenting the mix, and Vance had left, the band had left, and it was just me and their tour manager. So our normal practice is that after I document the mix and everything, we would run our backups to our backup system. So we have on-site Synology. At the time, I think we had a Drobo, but now we use a Synology RAID array server. And so just to locally back up all of our sessions at the end of the day, so we have the files in more than one place, always a good idea. And if you can do cloud service as well, that's really the best to keep something off-site.
Yeah.
So another thing we do at the end of every session when everything's done is normally we will send the band with a master and a safety drive so that they have a copy as well. So that's kind of basic practice. And I went along. So I went along with that in that it was interesting because the tour manager, he asked me at the end of the session, "Hey, do you mind if I get the files? I have some drives." And so in my mind, I was just kind of like, "Oh yeah, that would be a good idea." I'm actually being helpful here, and staying one step ahead and making sure that they have a copy. So I did that, went about my night. Next day, come in, and I just happened to mention that in the morning, and Vance actually got really upset because he didn't really think the session was going that well. And apparently the management hadn't worked out a deal and received any sort of deposit or back end or any payment. So as most of us know, or as engineers know in this industry, sometimes dealing with bands, you really have the only leverage you have sometimes to get paid if there's some sort of disagreement about the budget is that you withhold the masters. So you hang on to the files and you don't give them the full resolution mixes or the tracking files, what have you. So I had basically just gone ahead and given up all that leverage.
Yeah.
And ordinarily you would withhold those tracks. So that was a pretty big mistake on my part. I should have consulted Vance at the end of the day. I thought I was being proactive in backing up those files. And I didn't know that maybe this was a sneaky way for the band to skip out on paying for the session.
Oh, man.
Fortunately, it all worked out in this instance, and that was not the case. But yeah, that's definitely translated over into my own work, and I have contracts in place, and I make sure everyone is on the same page, and that payment has been sorted out and been made before delivering files.
Now, Are you using any of these like online services for delivering files that can help with that?
I haven't. We use Dropbox primarily if we're delivering any files. And I know you can like password protect that and set like an expiration date and things like that with Dropbox. That's kind of our primary thing. But usually my go-to for delivering files would just be physically on a hard drive. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I don't know if you're familiar with these, but two that one I have more experience with is called FilePass, and it will let you upload files for delivery, but they can't download them until they hit the pay button. So it works more in like a, kind of a consumer style transaction with labels and stuff. I think they'd probably look at you funny if you send them a buy now button
right
for deliveries. But then there's another one that has come out recently called Samply Audio. And that one looks like very promising too, because it's got some cool player features and things like that. So those might be things to check out, Rockstars.
That's very cool. I hadn't actually thought about that, but that's a great idea.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff really helps in terms of exactly what you said, where you can send it. Both of these offer high resolution streaming. So somebody can listen to a high res file playing back. And they have mixed comments built in where you can like drop in a note at a particular timestamp and all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty handy. But then when they're ready to pay for it, they just hit the pay button and it downloads.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool, man. Well, thank you for sharing that story. That was a tough one.
Yeah.
I also had like a, just a complete put a dunce cap on my head moment when I was interning at a studio, and I've shared that before. So I'll let you find that, Rockstars, in past episodes, but I know what that feels like. And it's good to have those learning experiences because that's how you remember to not do it again.
Exactly. Yeah. And like I said, luckily it all worked out in the end, but yeah, I definitely had my tail between my legs for a little while after that. Yeah.
Right on. The STX 100D from the Spectra 1964 Custom Shop is the big brother to the now famous STX 100, a fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers. The STX 100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 complementer, then check out the new STX 600 modules, combining the STX 100 mic pre and C610 in a single 500 module. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and complementers. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. OWC now brings you the Mini Stack STX, the world's first Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expander, perfectly sized to seamlessly stack with the Mac Mini and the ideal storage and connectivity companion for Thunderbolt or USB equipped computers and devices. With a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, you can expand your Mini's storage capacity to gigantic proportions. 3 Thunderbolt USB-C ports enable you to connect millions of Thunderbolt, USB, and future USB 4 drives, displays, AV mixers, cameras, and tablets, as well as desktop accessories like a keyboard, card reader, or mouse. Now, the possibilities of how you can use your Mac Mini are limited only to your imagination. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Well, so let me go to this question. You said you guys have moved some different consoles in and out of the studio with Vance, and I want to talk about something that's been on my mind recently, which is, do we need a console? Do we need some way to go out of Pro Tools when we mix, or do we, should we just stay in the box when we mix? I already am feeling biased about this, and I feel like we do need to actually go out because I'm hearing some differences in what can happen with the sound. But what are your thoughts on that? And what sort of stuff have you heard doing mixes that have been on different consoles versus in the box?
Yeah, so pretty funny because at my studio, I do not have a console. And I'm coming from the school of Vance Powell with a big console and tape machines and outboard gear and that's the way you make records, right? But I actually decided to forego having a console. And for a while there, I bought one and I was fully ready to install it in the studio. I was going to commit. I was going to go big. I bought a Neotech Elite, a 32 channel Elite, like the Albini desk.
Yep.
And last minute I got cold feet, and honestly, I'm glad I did. I'm really happy with the decision to just be mixing in the box. And now I track with outboard gear. I've got a bunch of great old analog vintage preamps and compressors. And so I'm under the thought now, since about May of 2020, of having my studio up and running, and just mixing everything that I've done here. Everything I've recorded, I've just mixed in the box here. And then I've also done a lot of mixing of outside projects in the box as well. And I wouldn't go back. And it's kind of funny because unlike most people who, I think the norm would be that you start out mixing in the box, and then maybe one day you can get a console and learn how to mix on a console. I kind of went backwards. I learned at Sputnik from Vance how to mix, and a lot of my earlier projects that I was taking on my own, I was able to use Sputnik and use the console there. So I kind of learned how to mix on a console.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got my own place, had to learn how to mix in the box. So it's kind of a little bit opposite than I think most people.
Yeah, but that's good, because that can give, now we're excited to hear you talk about some of the things that you've discovered about mixing in the box to make sure that it felt the way you wanted it to feel and sounded right.
Exactly. So I basically kind of set up a template that was very similar to what Vance was doing on the console. And I just kind of did that in the box with various parallel compressors and your typical inserts that you would see on channels, but just kind of the UAD versions or versions of different plugins that it's kind of the same manufacturer. And I think plugins, and especially the UAD stuff, is just getting so good nowadays that the difference is kind of incremental and between the real thing and the emulation, the plugin.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What about the summing though? What about the way that sometimes a console can, or just a really, when a mix comes together really well and you feel like there's a clarity to the high end and there's sort of a width and a depth. What are some things that you've discovered about that mixing in the box?
I think the only thing that my mixes here are lacking compared to if I was to go to Sputnik and put it up on the desk is definitely stereo field, like the width and the clarity. There's something about the two bus and everything coming together, like you were saying, that is a little more warm sounding because of obviously the analog side of things, and then the stereo field. But see, I would say that is not worth compare. That missing out on that is okay by me because of the ease of recalls for in the box. And honestly, I think that trumps everything as far as the minor differences that you might hear in the mix for me, because, and this is personal for me, because my job with Vance when we have to do recalls that's my job. I'm responsible. And so we have the SSL has this function called total recall, and it sweeps the desk, and it saves every position of every knob, fader, switch, button, and it saves it on a little floppy disk. So when we get a recall, I have to recall the desk, and luckily it has a little screen, and it has this really crappy 8-bit representation of an SSL channel, and you basically just move the knobs until they're set where they need to be on the screen, and then it jumps to the next. Yep, and then it jumps to the next channel. Yeah, and it chirps at you when you're done. And it's like a video game I've gotten really, really good at. So and then on top of that, he's got his mix patch, so I have to make sure that's all documented and the same. And then he's got a wall of outboard gear, the wall of rock. And I take, on average, about 250 photos per song.
Wow.
Of just outboard gear. And
let's pause right there, because Rockstars, photos is like 1,000 times easier than the traditional way, which was a hand-drawn recall sheet of every single piece of gear, right?
Yep, Exactly. So yes, very, very much more. It's easier the way we're doing it now for sure. We have a little iPad Mini, and I just take that and start taking pictures, and then put it in an album, put it in a folder that goes with the band. So, it takes time, and I've gotten it down to about a half an hour, maybe if it's a song from like a year ago, and I gotta kind of hunt around and things come and go from the studio. So that's another thing is like, hey,
Right.
well, we don't have that piece of gear anymore, or
Yeah.
it's in the shop. And so sometimes you got to get a little creative and figure out how to recreate that sound if it was a signature part of the mix. So I kind of have a little bit of PTSD from that, of
Right.
all those recalls, because it is stressful when you're trying to get it and it's supposed to be exact, and it's my job to document it. And so over the years, yeah, I've maybe missed a picture or had to figure out like, you everything looks right according to my recall, but clearly there's a difference in the low end here, or this effect seems really wet compared to the print. So yeah, it can be pretty stressful, and
And part of that is that you have a track that has the mix on it, and then you're
mhm,
flipping back and forth between your recall and the mix itself, and you're
yep,
trying to match it perfectly. You're trying to match where you left off
yep.
exactly.
And kind of all bets are off when you go full analog. I mean, it's never ever going to come back exactly the same. But with this total recall system, with the SSL, and being able to recall the desk so accurately, that's half the battle. And when we had the Soundcraft prior, we didn't have that technology. So I actually
More
had to take
photos.
I had to take pictures of the desk, yes, in like banks of 4 channels at a time and at different angles to get the nuances of each knob and all that.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so that was really hard when we had that. So the SSL, Vance actually kind of got that for that reason, because he wanted to stay relevant uh, in this ever increasing digital world we find ourselves in. To stay analog, that was kind of the only way we could really do what we do. And everybody thinks that they can just you can just recall it at the drop of a hat, and it's like, well, that's
Right.
because you can if it's in the box, but that's not how Vance likes to mix or make records. So that's a big reason why I'm employed, is because he wants to use the desk, and he wants to mix analog and use all this outboard gear, but we need to be able to recall it, because people have changes all the time, and it might be minor little things that we think don't matter, but at the end of the day, it's their record. They're gonna, it's forever. It's gonna be out there. They got to listen to it, and if they're willing to pay for the recall, then we'll do it.
Right. So that's the key part of that story, which is while it can be exciting to mix in a studio like you just described with Vance, we just need to remember that what accompanies that is a much larger commitment on time, energy, and expense.
Hmm.
Just upkeep alone. So
Yes.
so it's just good to always remember that. And when we make decisions about like, do we need to have this a big console with our Pro Tools rig, or do we go to the Pro Tools rig? We have to remember that there are gains for everything that we let go of too. So for example,
Yep.
you might, I'll let you answer this question, but you might find yourself having more energy and time for, the creative approach of your production and mixing, because you can just pull up a Pro Tools session and it's where you left off. And now you can jump right in versus having to put all the energy into the half hour of recall before you even get started.
Yes, exactly. So the in the box thing opens the door to unnecessary recalls, because you can. So that can kind of spiral out of control a little bit too. So that is the upside of having the console, is it's a little bit more like, hey, everybody cool with this? We like this. Everybody's on the same page, sounding good. Okay, sign off on it. And then sometimes when they find out about, oh, it's going to cost me money if I want to do this recall, sometimes it's not worth it to them, and they go, I can live with that. Okay, cool. Um, but but yeah, I think having the console, it's cool. There's a lot of benefits to it, but as far as what I'm doing in a home studio, having less the added overhead of the cost of the console, the cost of maintaining the console, another big decision, which makes me really glad that I didn't go with it, is heat, the footprint of how much heat that the console puts off. So my control room, when I'm tracking and I have all this outboard gear on, and I have a lot of tube compressors, tube preamps, old vintage stuff, it gets a little toasty in here. So if I had the console on top of that, I would have had to get a mini split, an AC to offset that heat.
And a big one. My control room, my mini split is oversized because it needed to compensate for my console being on and all the heat that was generated in there too.
And those aren't cheap. Yeah.
Well, very cool. All right. Well, so tell us about some of the stuff that you're excited about that you've been doing in your new studio, and tell us about Starboard Sound. Yeah.
So Starbird. So my wife and I, Madeline, we bought this house back in 2020, January. So right before the pandemic, and the house had a studio already built out in the basement. It's a split level house. So the whole bottom floor is 2-car garage and then the studio. It's great. It's got a separate entrance, got its own bathroom. So I can kind of keep the house and the studio totally separate, which is awesome. So it took me a while to get my gear in here and get everything set up. And there was a couple few key pieces of gear that I had yet to buy to make everything work, because they're ever changing. So one was a computer, because that technology is always advancing. So, over the years that I've been in Nashville, I've bought a lot of gear along the way that I knew I was going to use. And so some of these things I was unboxing from like 5 years ago that I had bought, that I was finally getting to implement and to put into action.
I know that feeling.
Oh yeah.
I bought one of the new Apple Mac Mini M1s months ago, and I still haven't even finished hooking it up to even try using it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just stuff, an embarrassment of riches. So my apartment before we moved into this house was just cleverly stacked, guitar amps on top of guitar cases and various keyboards, just cleverly hidden away and tucked into each room, basically.
Nice, man. Sounds like you got a sweet place started.
Yeah. So now I actually have the room for it. It's pretty awesome. So it's just a decent sized control room. And it's got whoever we bought the house from, they wired it up all. So there's 3 major panels. In the live room, there's a big panel by the drums, and there's a smaller one on the opposite side of the wall. And I've kind of been doing this. I bought some gobos. I just found some really good gobos off Craigslist, and some guy was downsizing and didn't need them for a smaller space. He didn't have the room for them. So I've been doing this technique of barn stalling, the Glenn Johns of lining up the guitar amps with the front edge of the kick drum. And Vance and I have done that on a bunch of records. And I think he's probably even talked about it too on the podcast. But yeah, really the best thing about it is if you get a live band and they're tight, they play well together, and nobody's going to kind of mess up the take if everybody's playing at once in the room. I can have an amp on either side of the drums, and I've got them goboed off and kind of a straight path for everybody to get into the control room and then back out into the tracking room. And I've got a nice size vocal booth that I actually kind of shoehorned an upright piano into. So I can cut live piano with no drum bleed, live vocals with no drum bleed. And then the guitars, I kind of just let go out in the live room with those gobos. And it's actually pretty amazing, the lack of bleed of guitars in the drums. There's almost no drums in the guitars, because, especially if you're doing rock music, because the microphones are so close to the source. And if the guitars are loud, you get like no drums in there. But I was really surprised at my overheads and my room mic at the lack of guitars in the drum mics. And the gobos
bass? Bass is cool too.
I always, because of the space limitations, I DI the bass and then I'll reamp it later. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So I just go direct, and then you're just monitoring the direct on the headphones, and that's worked great.
What do you find people really love about recording that way with the 2 amps right next to the drums? Is there a real benefit to it?
I think it's just you get the energy rather than kind of doing one thing at a time. And also, I mean, if you could throw it in a booth, and occasionally I have done that. Especially if there's only one guitar player, I'll throw that in the vocal booth, just to isolate that, so it's not kind of uneven on one side of the drums or the other. So, but with two guitars, if there's two guitars players in the band and they're both playing at the same time, you kind of get the gel, you get the take and the energy, the live take, and then because there is that little extra bleed going on, it kind of just squishes everything together. And I think I've done it both ways, and I think there's a little extra something going on when you have the guitars on both sides and everything's just going at once in the room.
That sounds exciting. I imagine it must give it a little bit of a 3D quality too, especially if you're, panning drums to the middle and guitars to the sides. What about the overhead mics on the drums? Is this like, you're kind of doing the Glyn Johns style, right? So do you pan the overhead and the floor tom mic sort of hard to left and right to go with the same side as the guitars or anything like that?
So what I'm actually doing for the overheads is not Glyn Johns style. I've been partial to an R88, the AEA R88, the stereo ribbon. And so I've been doing that kind of straight down the middle of the drums, kind of dividing, above the kick drum and just dividing each side. And I hard pan that. And then a couple sessions we tried it with Vance, and I tried it and I really liked it. So I've got a pair of these vintage, it's a company called Thiele, and they're from the 50s. And they have M7 capsules. This guy, Joachim Wetzel, was actually, he kind of created his own M7 capsule and was sourcing it to various companies. So he had his own company, Wetzel Microphones. Thiele was another one. And so I've got a pair of these old condensers. And so they're kind of spec'd like a U47. And I put those wide on either side. So you got the stereo ribbon right over the top, kind of getting a good over the top image focused ribbon so it can kind of soften the cymbal hits. And then I've got these condensers that are really wide and even and symmetrical on each side, kind of high, same height. So it's kind of hitting at the same time as the R88. So the phase is all the same. And that kind of, I pan those super wide as well. So I kind of get this more detailed, bright, wider, roomier image with the wides mixed in with the R88.
Okay, and then are they like symmetrical wide looking straight at the drums, or more like one's a little above the hi-hat, one's a little above the ride?
That's they're symmetrical, yeah. So they're spaced evenly, but yeah, I'd say like one's definitely one's ride side, one's hi-hat side, but they're the same height and one might be a little further from a cymbal than the other. And
omni or cardioid looking down?
Cardioid. Yep.
Okay, cool. So they're looking down, and they're almost looking down at the top of the guitar amps too, right?
So the guitar amps are on the other side, and the way they're kind of they're almost 45 degrees. They're probably a little bit shallower of an angle towards the kit. So yeah, and those baffles are really high. So that's the other thing is I got the baffles themselves. The bottom part of it is where all the rock wool is, and it's like one side is rock wool and fabric, and the other side is wood. And so on top of that, the guy I bought them from, he made these plexiglass baffles. And so those go up another couple feet so that I can have line of sight with everybody. So everybody can see through those plexiglass baffles. And those are tilted, much like studio glass, how you tilt that for reflections. And that actually blocks out a decent amount of sound as well. So yeah, those wide overhead microphones actually still don't have a lot of guitar in them.
That's very cool. All right, dig it. I like that. The Toy Box Studio, aka Recording Studio Rockstars headquarters, is proud to announce that it is now an official Phantom Focus mix room designed by Carl Tatz. Yay! The beautiful new control room includes Carl's acoustic lens room treatment with the PFM HD 1000 master reference monitors laser aligned for holographic stereo imaging and depth of field with accuracy from 20 hertz to over 20 kilohertz. I've never mixed on a speaker system this awesome before, and it feels great. I used to feel like I would commit to a mix, cross my fingers, and hope that it would translate to the real world. But now, when I dream up a sound that I want to create in the studio, I just turn the mix knobs and the phantom focus monitors tell me truthfully when I get it right. Amazing. Check out my complete interview with Carl Tatz on episode 50 of the podcast and discover the secret to massively improving your monitor setup at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. Okay, cool. So where do we go from here? I know one of the bands that you mentioned, I don't know if this was one from your studio. Were we talking about, there was one that you said a new one you were excited about, and then there was another one, Down Boy, Other Side, which I had some questions about that project, just talking about how it had a lot of great organs and whirlies and Rhodes sound and stuff like that. I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about also how you approach recording things like keyboards, organs, pianos, Wurlitzers or Rhodes, if you had any thoughts about that, or mixing.
Yeah. So the keys side of things, mostly, I think that record, the Down Boy stuff, was primarily a lot of the B3 sounds. We did that at Sputnik on Mitch's side. It was my coworker, Cohen Terry. He's Mitch's assistant now. He actually brought the project to me and assisted me, and I engineered it and produced it. And he, so I guess the lead singer, guitar player is also a keys player. So there's a 3-piece band. The other 2 guys are bass and drums. And so he kind of plays everything else besides the bass and drums. So everything you're hearing on that record. And when he plays live, he'll just have his Nord set up and his guitar on, and he'll just kind of go back and forth depending on the song or what he's doing. Really talented guy. And so he was partial to the Nord, and we actually set up the B3 and with the Leslie and got that sound, and he kind of wanted to go back to the Nord. So I was like, okay, well, what can we do about this? So I actually ran it through a guitar amp just to kind of get it little, just to get it a little less digital, a little less Nord, if you will. So
do you remember what amp you thought you ended up deciding was the right fit for a keyboard sound like that?
It was a Blackface Bassman, and I would believe it was a later model, one of the AB165 circuits, and it was Mitch's. So it's got a lot of headroom, and it's just, that super clean 50-watt Bassman sound. So I wasn't getting as much like amp breakup.
Right. Not looking for crunch or distortion necessarily.
Exactly. Yeah. But just looking for a little tube warmth out of that. Mm-hmm. And I saw what was cool is in his booth, because he was also playing guitar, but he never played guitar or keys at the same time. So we set up a guitar amp right next to that. And I think that was more along in the vein of a Princeton reverb. And I would leave both mics on and just record all the time. And so that microphone on the amp, when he was playing the keys, that would be picking up some of that sound. And so I would use that and put effects on that, like extra reverbs, and make it kind of a bigger, roomy sound. But it was just kind of an added extra free channel of some keyboard sounds. Or when he was playing guitar, I'd get the microphones that were on the Bassman, and I'd use those and throw some effects on those. It's just kind of an extra free track.
Nice.
That I could mess around with when I was mixing.
Yeah, that's a good tip, is looking for the opportunity to use existing mics out there as room mics.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so what about recording organ? I mean, that's a great idea to do the Rhodes. To do the Nord through the amps like that. And it is really handy to have instruments right there for the creating side. And there have been many times where we've tracked with a keyboard like that, and then we go back and replace the keyboard later, which is sometimes really fun because you can improve the sound and then you get excited about that. But other times you're like, I don't want to lose the vibe and the performance. You don't want it to get stiff and stuff. But do you have any other ways that you like to mic up an organ or a piano or even a Wurlitzer or Rhodes?
Yeah. So organ, we normally do 57s on the top horn, and we'll do 2 kind of on either side. So you get a stereo that goes to a stereo track with the horns, with the top horn, and then either oftentimes Sennheiser 421 on the bottom, and that's kind of what we do all the time. and we actually just kind of leave the microphones there and leave them set up at Sputnik.
Nice.
And actually, I've got an M2 here, a little poor man's B3, and but I have a Leslie, a full size Leslie in a closet of mine, so I can isolate that, a little amp closet here at Starbird. And I've got that same setup here, and I just leave the microphones patched. So if I ever need to just fire it up, I got 257s in the 421. Go.
I remember sort of discovering that after recording my Leslie a few different ways, because I feel like in school they were like, we're going to set up a pair of stereo 414 AKGs and on the horns, and then we're going to set up a stereo pair of 414s on the drum down below, and then we're going to set up stereo 414s for room mics, and then like further room, like it got so crazy.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. And then like, but when I actually started using it on a session, and we just kind of, there was something we did where we threw up just a pair of 57s or some dynamics. And all of a sudden I was like, well, shit, that sounds great. Like that totally sits with the guitars, and I don't have to cut out all the low end, and resculpt it.
Blend that. Yeah. Blend that 421 in as you need it. And we never really even compress it either. I know Vance likes to add a little dirt, or sometimes if we're mixing B3, throw a little like a little real tape saturator plug-in on it and flip it to the lo-fi setting, and it kind of gives it more of this vintage, like the EQ kind of rolled off sort of sound. And he adds a little dirt to it to make it poke out in the mix.
Dig it, man. I like hearing that. What are some other fun little mix tricks that you've learned working with Vance? What about, other parallel things or cool stuff to do for the drums, for example?
Well, he does a lot of drum parallel stuff when mixing. The main thing for the drum parallels are, I think, pretty much every drum except for the overheads and the rooms. So your kick, snare, toms, they go to a drum bus that is a stereo bus of he has two of them, but the first one is a 33609. And so that comes back in parallel. And then the drum crush bus is a Fatso, Empirical Labs Fatso Junior. Nice. And that is just the kick snare crush bus. So I believe all the knobs on that are just set to 5 right across the board, kind of right up the middle. The in and the out, left side, the in and out, right side are just set to 5. And then the warmth is right up the middle. I think it's on 4. And then he links them together. I think the transformer's out. And then there's a button on the left side that cycles through, I think it's GP and spank and bus, or I think it goes in.
That's all part of the Fatso?
Yes. So those lights are all 3 of those lights are on. So it's really, crushing it pretty hard.
Right.
And so that's kind of the drum parallel. Then he has a couple other little secret sauce compressors. There's an Opticom. I believe it's an XLA3, I believe. It's a green compressor from the Acme guys. And that usually goes on kick or snare or both. That just kind of comes back in parallel. And that unit's interesting. It's kind of a prototype, and it's kind of broken. Like, it doesn't sound like any of the other ones. It was one of the first ones they came out with. And he tells them that, but he's like, but don't fix it. So if ever we have to send it back to get service, he's like, don't fix whatever's broken with it, but maybe just put some new tubes in it. So that's another one. And then obviously, I think he's talked about it a bunch. He's got this little Ampex 1101 that he uses as a kind of a knee mic. It's kind of pointed at the side of the snare. And then he puts that through a pedal loop, a radial XTC, and then that goes through a polysat and this Beard Verb pedal that has a little reverb, a little delay on one side. And so that's where he gets those little triplet delays and a lot of the cool dirty drums. It's really just that one channel. When we're tracking stuff, we pretty much do that. If we're going anywhere, if we go to another studio to track, you better believe we're bringing the radial, the loop, and those pedals and that knee mic. And
nice.
And oftentimes, like sometimes sessions that we've gone to where it's a fly date or something, that's all we've brought.
So how would you describe the tone of that? So when I hear that, what I love about it is it doesn't sound like, oh, that's the only way to do that. It sounds like, hey, we have permission to invent a cool thing to add to our drums. But I think the one thing that maybe would be a good carryover is what's the tone, spectrum coming from that knee mic? Is it got deep low end to it, or is it sort of like, would you say it's sort of like, the 200 up to the 1K range where it's like just sort of tone and character without fighting with low end or fighting with high end or any of those kind of things?
Yeah, it's much more the latter, like you said. I think it's a little scooped below because it's a cheap microphone that came with Ampex tape machines, and it's high Z. And he thinks it might be Omni, not sure exactly, but it does capture a little bit of the thump, but really it's just kind of it's kind of the snare and the delay from the kick and the snare. I mean, it's all with the polysat and everything. It gets super saturated and super low, kind of lo-fi sounding. So I don't think the microphone is anything close to full range,
right?
Just by nature, and I think that's what contributes to the sound a lot.
And then where's the delay coming from again?
So that's the Beard Verb pedal. So it's got a delay, and I believe it's got a delay and distortion and reverb. But he just uses the delay function on that.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So a takeaway for us
pedal
rock stars would be pick a cheap mic or pick some, character mic, route it into a mic pre, give yourself something to get it crunchy, give yourself something to get some delay or verb on it, and see what happens when you start blending that in. And I'm sure you're reaching for that the moment somebody's playing drums. You're just grabbing the timing on that and adjusting it a little bit.
Yep.
So that it does something cool.
Yep. So actually my recreation of that at Starbird is I have an 1101 and I've used that before. But I actually like to use that on vocals as a dirty mic. So I'll do that in conjunction with a condenser or a ribbon, depending on the artist, and I'll have the 1101 just right in line, right next to that microphone. So it's in phase, and then I'll treat that one if I want a little dirt on the vocal after the fact. But so I've been using this little, it's not a Shure brand, but it's essentially a bullet mic. And so that's what I've been using for my knee mic. And I just capture that clean. And then in the box afterwards, I use, I think, just a distressor plug-in to give it a little more, just compress it a little bit, kind of even things out with it. And then I throw a THC plug-in on there and the total harmonic distortion plug-in there. And I'll kind of get that so it's a dirty level. And that's a really cool plugin because it's got the wet dry. So you can make it really dirty and then back it off if you have to with the mix knob or the blend bar at the bottom. And then I use just the tape echo plugin that comes standard with Pro Tools. And then I just kind of try and find, according to the beat, or if you're playing to a click, it'll have a function where you can turn on a sync, and then there's also a button there that will do triplets if you want it as well.
That's cool, man. When you're doing that, I mean, one of the thoughts that occurs to me is when we use plugins for things, if we're in the tracking part, now our timing, our latency might be slightly off. Does that matter much for that kind of parallel treatment along with the drums, or does that not matter because the sound's so screwed up anyway that you're not really getting that phasing thing? Or is it even beyond that where it's just like you're really just hearing the return of the delay echo anyway?
Yeah, I think you're dialing in the sound with the latency happening at the same time. So you're messing with the delay, hearing that latency baked in, and like you said, the sound is kind of already so messed up that that never really factors in with me when I'm messing with it.
Okay, cool. Well, that's awesome, man. Thanks for sharing that. And
yeah,
what's cool is you talk about using the plugin, and I think maybe did you say the distressor plugin? Is that what you said?
Yep. Yeah, just to compress it a little bit.
Yeah. So I have the Arouser, which is the non-UAD version.
Yeah.
And it's It's great. It's so great that I make it my default compressor in Pro Tools, because I guess you get to pick a couple of default plugins.
Yeah, your quick key plugins there. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't even know they were quick key. Which quick key is it?
Well, I think if you hold Command when you select it, then it'll throw it into that top button. So like at the top of the list. Yep.
Okay, cool. And then the other one is I'm now putting the Big Freak, which is the Empirical Labs EQ plugin in there because it just sounds so good. I'm going to start using that a bunch more. But what I discovered recently in giving myself a lot of, like playing time in the studio to just mess around, record myself on drums and mess things up and see what happens is I knew I liked the Arouser plugin a lot, and Rockstar's Empirical Labs, the Distressor, the Fatso, the Distressor plugin, the Arouser plugin. Dave Durr makes awesome stuff. But the Arouser plugin, I knew that I liked the compression, but I'd never really messed around with the saturation part. I'd always just like been really cautious with it, or I was like, oh, I don't know, it's supposed to sound like tape, but it didn't really sound like tape to me. I finally started jacking it way up on drums, and oh my God, it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So like when I have a kick or a snare that sounds too pokey or too wrong to me, start saturating that plugin, and wow, it really does make it sound old school and tape in a really cool way.
Yeah. Yeah. I got to try that out as well.
All right. Awesome. Well, let's see. Tell us about this. There was a record that I didn't have in the list here. I got a lot in the list, but I know there's a band that you had mentioned. Was it Dunn or something like that? Or
it's DOG, spelled
Dog, right?
DEEOHGEE. So dog, yes.
Okay, great.
Phonetically spelled out.
What is it backwards though?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I've been working with them since about 2018, and they are, I guess by the time this airs, their album will have dropped. So that's great. So everybody out there can go check it out. And they're a 3-piece band here in Nashville. They were formerly called the Blackfoot Gypsies, and they changed their name to DOG. And they've gone on tour with a bunch of big acts and had some pretty cool notoriety. And so I felt really lucky to record them. And they were one of the first bands that I actually recorded their full length album. And so I recorded at Sputnik way back in 2018, and they had some problems with their label, and they were trying to get out of whatever deal they were in. And the label wanted part of their next release if they were going to break their agreement. And so they put out a live album that I mixed, a live from the basement, the OG basement they played at. And so I mixed that. Somebody else recorded it. I mixed it. And they tried to put that out and say to the label, hey, here you go. Here's our live album. Because obviously that's cheaper than doing a studio album. And the label didn't bite. So they eventually kind of, after forming, getting with a different company, different booking agency and different label, they finally decided to start releasing this one. So, but that means years had gone by. And so this being one of the first things I worked on, years later, they're kind of come back to me, and I'm always kind of touching base with them and saying, hey, like, when are you guys planning on releasing that album? Because I knew it was just a matter of time, but a lot of time went by. So then they finally told me, like, hey, we worked it out. We're going to start thinking about releasing that. And I was like, it's been like almost 3 years. Can I take another crack at mixing it before you put it out?
Nice.
And by then I had Starbird open and I was mixing in the box. So I actually took the mixes, the live mixes that I had done at Sputnik on the SSL, and I put them up, and I made a template, and I didn't listen to the mixes at first, and I just routed it through my normal template that I had been using, kind of set a balance, and then I A-B'd just a balance. I A-B'd what I was my starting point mixing in the box versus the mix, and it blew it out of the water immediately.
Your new mixes in the box blew it out of the water.
Yes,
and that's exciting, dude.
And not just because I'm not saying necessarily that it was because it was in the box or what have you, but I'm just saying I had learned so much in those 3 years that just even starting off was like, it was almost laughable, like in comparison, the
Come on,
mixes that
give us a good evil laugh.
yeah, the mixes that I had done 3 years ago compared to what I was putting out now. So, but how many opportunities do you have as an engineer producer to be able to, because I'm sure we all have those records that we put out, that we loved, that we thought, this sounds great, and you put it out, and then a couple years later you listen to it again, you're like, ah, man, like I wish I could take another crack at that, or like, I've learned this, or wow, things will jump out at you, I think, years later after you've learned a bunch. So I was just really excited to have that they let me, and that, like, how many opportunities do you get?
Yeah, that's cool.
To do something like that. Yeah.
Probably more often than not, you get the opportunity to go, boy, do I really have to take another crack at this mix right now?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you feel like the time you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has not gotten you anywhere? Have you been looking for a simple or straightforward step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could learn that process from a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is for you. Now you can discover a proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Here's a quote from one of the students. Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information mentoring on the mix process I've ever been a part of. This was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Look, when you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and go check out Craig's ultimate snare mixing trick now for free. Well, that's cool, man. Well, congrats on that. And that's really exciting, especially for, getting things rolling in your new studio. You must be really, really excited about it. And I love hearing about the live room and the gobo setup that you've got going. That just sounds like you got a setup that's going to be fun to make some exciting recordings in.
Yeah, it's always a work in progress. I mean, every session that I've done here, being a new studio, you kind of figure out as you go. So I'd have a session and prepare as much as possible and get everything set up, click out all the mics, know what instruments I need to be recording. So have setups for those. And then kind of do some pre-production with the band and kind of get a punch list for what I'm hearing on each song, and attack it like that. But until you're in the thick of it, and the drummer goes, "Hey, do you have one of these?" And you go, "Oh no," and then I'm gonna have to get that. And so I now, ever since starting here, I've just got a running list on my phone, a little note where I just like things I need to buy for the studio, because it's just, you don't know you need it until you need it, until someone asks for it, and then you're like, I never thought of that. Okay, cool. And then just constantly figuring out little workarounds, how to deal with certain issues that arise, and okay, let me think about how I can fix that. And building Sputnik was handy too. Luckily, I haven't had to do much construction at all. I thought when I found where I was going to wind up recording and have a studio of my own, that I was fully prepared to kind of have a garage or a detached building or a space where then I was going to build it all myself, because I learned so much from that experience building Sputnik. But honestly, I found this space and it was already kind of good to go, and so I just moved my stuff in and started working. But yeah, every session, kind of figure out something that works and something you need to work on, and it's never ending, and that's kind of the fun of it. Is just it's always evolving too.
That's awesome, man. Well, I'm excited to see it in person at some point.
Yeah.
And since we're nearing the end of the show, why don't we jump into our jam session questions, and we'll just fire through them real quick if you want.
All right, let's do it.
All right, cool, man. So when you started out in recording, what do you feel like was holding you back?
So for me, having the opportunity that I had as Vance's assistant, I didn't want my own work to interfere with my role with Vance. Um, and we worked all the time. Our schedule is always jam packed. Sometimes we work weekends, we've worked holidays. Um, and so I think that was holding me back at first. Is like one major reason would truly be the lack of time. When I wasn't recording with Vance, if I get a day off, I was thinking about my life, my friends, family, my relationships, and kind of just enjoying my time not working. Um, so for a long time, it was just like put my head down and just worked and tried to learn as much as possible from Vance, and get good at it before I started recording my own stuff. I'd say secondary to that would be like the fear of inexperience and working for a long time as an assistant, before I got in the hot seat myself. Just crossing that threshold, and you can watch somebody do something 1,000 times and figure out like, okay, this is how they do it, but you're never really going to learn until you actually do it.
Yeah.
And those mistakes that you make while you're doing it are oftentimes the biggest part of that learning experience.
Right
So
on, man. Right
yeah,
on. Good tip. How about some of the best advice you received?
I'd have to go with from the school of Vance Powell is make decisions on the way in while recording. Don't leave things open for interpretation later. And I think the big thing that I learned from him is when you track to mix. So tracking to mix is shaping the sound of the record on the way down. And if you get really good sounds and you commit to sounds, and um, then the mixing process is actually pretty easy. Oftentimes stuff that Vance tracks, the difference between the rough mix or the tracking mix that we do at the end of the song, he'll just run a quick mix. The difference isn't night and day.
It's
It definitely
like,
sounds better. It definitely sounds more clean and polished, and good stereo separation of things, and there'll be added effects and whatnot and carving out frequencies, but really he's getting the sound on the way in. And so that's the best advice that I received from him, or
awesome, man.
in general. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. How about sharing a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something the rock stars could use on their next session?
Yeah. So I use, and I've actually taken this, I learned this from, we've done a lot of pure mix videos with, shout out to Fab DuPont and his awesome crew. So I've got a subscription to Pure Mix as well, and I've watched a bunch of their videos. I believe one of the first videos that Andrew Sheps does with Pure Mix, he talks about this old Waves plugin called R-Bass, or Renaissance Bass, and he uses that to kind of harmonically synthesize some low end goodness on electric bass or toms. So I've used that. I use that pretty much on every mix that I'm doing, and it really beefs up the low end. Now that the extra thing that I do, and he might do it too, I can't recall from the video, but I've set up presets on that for that plugin so that I find the key of the song, and then I found a chart online that had the corresponding note of the key of the song and the corresponding frequency. So the root note and that cycle, what that equates to. And so I've saved in my plugin drop-down window every key that there is. And so if the key of the song is in C, I just click the drop-down menu, hit C, then I got my frequency, and then you can mess around with the input, the gain, the output, and then the intensity. And I will say a little bit goes a long way for this. And but it's honestly kind of jaw-dropping when you throw it on the bass and when you throw it on your toms, what it does to make them poke out in the mix and really beef them up. And
That's awesome.
I like to make sure. See, Vance always, from Vance's mixing and just learning how he mixes the low end, he really likes the kick drum to be around 50 hertz. He kind of boosts that quite a bit. So that's a little lower than most times. It's oftentimes that's where the bass guitar lives. But he really likes that frequency for the kick to be like, that's kind of where that's living, that thump of around 50. So I make sure that whatever, and that's what I do as well. And so the R-Bass plugin, I make sure that whatever corresponding frequency to the key is, that it's above 50, because I don't want that super low being enhanced and fighting for position with the kick drum. So, I think whatever the lowest frequency, it's somewhere around 60, I think is where the lowest key frequency that I start at.
Okay. Awesome, man. Nice.
Yeah.
Way to be in depth on that one. Love it.
Yeah.
All right. Share a favorite hardware tool, something physical like you like to have around on a session.
Favorite hardware tool. I'm looking around here.
Could be anything. Could even be a pencil.
So I guess this is a good one. I've got I asked Vance. So I'm a big amplifier guy. I'm a guitar player. I love amps. I've got a lot of guitar amps. For a long time, I was just buying and selling and flipping guitar amps and looking on eBay, Craigslist, Reverb, whatever, and driving all over the country to get them, old rare Fenders. I'm kind of a Fender guy, but I got a bunch of Valco stuff as well. So I asked Vance when I was just starting out. I think I was Mitch's assistant, and I asked him, "Hey Vance, what is your end all be all desert island guitar amp? If you could only have one amp to rule them all, what would that guitar amp be?" And he, without blinking, he said 1964 Fender Vibroverb. And it's the black panel 115. And it was the first. There was a brown panel one that they only made like 500 of them, and that's the first ever Fender Vibroverb, the first ever Fender amp that had reverb and vibrato. So hence Vibroverb. So
Nice.
And who made that famous? The black panel one is a single 15, and that was made famous by Stevie Ray Vaughan, and he actually had two of them, and so that was his guitar sound, and so they're super rare. I think they only made 4,500 of the black panel one, and I got that information and I typed that into Craigslist, and boom, I found one in Florida. And the guy was I believe he's in Miami, or no, he might have been on the Gulf side, so maybe Tampa area. And I said he had posted it on the Nashville Craigslist because he probably thought that's the only place somebody's going to spend that kind of money to get it.
Right.
And I kind of talked to him, touched base with him, and he was like, "Hey, I'm actually driving up to the Panhandle to hang out with some friends." He was an older guy, and he was kind of not playing guitar anymore and looking to get out of it. And he's like, "I know what this amp's worth, and my kids don't want it; they're not into it, so I'm just going to sell it, and hopefully it's going to a good home." And I told him, I was like, "Yeah, man, I'm all about it. If you want to bring it up to the Panhandle with you on vacation, I'll drive down and come get it." So after work one day, I left the studio and just drove straight down to, I think it was Navarre Beach, and met up with him and bought the amp. And when I came back, Vance was so pissed off at me. And that felt so good. Because I knew it was, I felt a little sad about it, or a little sorry for him about it. But the beauty of it is it has been at Sputnik Sound to this day, and we've made a ton of records on it. So he's gotten to use it, and that's where it's lived. It hasn't ever left Sputnik. And I've had it for 7 years. So that's the one that it always wins pretty much. It's got a bunch of headroom. You can get cleans, or it takes pedals really well. And we've done slide or pedal steel slide guitar. You can get away with that. And I've even played bass through it, and some synthesizers and stuff too. So yeah, the Vibroverb I'd say is the favorite tool for recording.
Awesome, man. Well, in the interest of time, let me jump forward to our final closing question.
Okay.
And this one is going to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you get to go back and find young Mike Fahey, who is making bongs in the metalsmithing shop at college. And you say, listen, dude.
Too real, man.
I've come back in time to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the recording studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
I would say simply be a yes person, especially in the beginning when you're starting out. Just say yes to any opportunity, any and all opportunities that are going to come your way. Have a good attitude, kill them with kindness, and that if you say yes to anything, it'll demonstrate your loyalty. It'll show that you're reliable, and it will make you indispensable. And being indispensable in the studio as an assistant. That's what I've tried to do. That's what I've done. Obviously, I'm still there for a reason. And making yourself indispensable means that when you're not there, things don't work right. When you're not around, they can't work without you. So that's the key: is say yes, make yourself indispensable, be loyal, show up on time, be punctual. Yeah.
Planned obsolescence. Just kidding. No, that's great, man. I love that. Yeah. And, at some point, I think we learn how to say no, but at the beginning, saying yes is the key for sure.
That's how I got this far. As I said yes. And then as Vance says, the word no has a lot of power, and you can learn how powerful the word no is, but you got to say yes at first.
Yeah. You got to say yes to get there.
Yep.
Awesome, dude. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. It was great to hang out with you. Thanks for sharing all your awesome stories. Loved hearing about your background. And, you shared a lot of great insights into the studio stuff. So thank you. Let the rock stars know, how can they find you online? Where would you like them to go check out your work? What if they're ready to make their next hit record with you?
Yeah, you can find me. I've got a link tree. It's just Starboard Sound, and that has links to starboardsound.com or mikefahey.co. Those are all the same. It goes to my AllMusic, goes to my LinkedIn. And then my social media is, I've got LinkedIn, and then my personal account is Bad MF Amps. And then and then the studio is just at Starboard Sound. And my email is mike@starboardsound.com.
Okay, groovy, man. Well, thank you, dude. And it's been a pleasure hanging with you.
Likewise, Lidge. I really appreciate you having me on the show, and I hope to see you soon.
All right, man. Thanks so much for listening to Rockstars. Thanks, Mike. We'll see you around the studio, dude. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, Carl Tatz Design, and Isotope. Remember to use the coupon codes ROCK10 at isotope.com/rockstars for 10% off any individual plugin purchase, or start your extended 30-day free trial subscription to get access to lots of plugins. And sign up for your free free account at samplyaudio.com and get 2 projects now. Or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months of subscription. Plus, use the coupon ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course at Recording Studio Rockstars Academy for a limited time. You'll find links to all these wonderful sponsors in our show notes. Just scroll down. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.